last class about anything? Okay, so last class we looked at evaluation frameworks. At the very end, I showed you sort of the academic paper. The paper is linked from the Moodle, so you can take a look at it if you want. And just to sort of recap, it's a comparative methodology for evaluating security alternatives. So you compare things that might be substituted for each other. It's good for illustrating trade-offs. So usually you have a lot of alternatives because there's trade-offs. If there aren't trade-offs and there's some technology that's just better than every other technology, then then normally everyone would use it and you wouldn't have a lot of alternatives. So when you look at something like passwords, where some people use two-factor, some use biometrics, some use single sign-on, like there's 10 different schemes that you might use on a day-to-day basis, then you know that there's got to be some trade-offs there, because otherwise everyone would just use two-factor or use a password manager or whatever. And it's good at considering factors beyond security. So this is a theme that we'll see almost throughout the whole course. A lot of the emphasis actually on the course is what are some other factors that affect security beyond like the technical security itself, right? So you have all the technical properties. You're going to learn about those in the 4 courses that you take, like 6110 to 6140. You'll learn lots of technical measures. And in this course, we sort of concentrate on what are some other factors that influence security but aren't really strict security or technical security topics. Okay, so questions about evaluation frameworks? All right, so your assignment, I haven't done it yet. I'll do it sometime, and I'll either announce it next class, or if it gets done before next class, I'll send an email or something. But I'll ask you to do an evaluation framework on something. So I'll choose a topic, and then you'll do it, and so you'll be picking the columns, you'll pick the rows, and you'll do some of the evaluation itself. Sorry? Yeah, exactly. UDS, yeah. So the assignment will guide you a bit. So it will say, okay, go pick 5 usability properties, go pick 5 security properties or whatever. Yeah. So it won't be completely open-ended. But anyways. Okay, so then we'll move on. So the next thing I want to talk about are attack trees. So attack trees are sometimes called threat trees as well. I think I said in the first class that, attack usually is a word that refers to something that actually happened. A threat is something that could potentially happen, but maybe hasn't happened yet. There could be the threat of something, but then it turns out that there's a solid defense. So it didn't ever turn into an attack. It was always just a threat. So you can use this tool to think about threats, or you can think about it to sort of illustrate attacks. But most commonly it's used with threats, but we just, for whatever reason, people have called it attack trees. So people will say attack trees, but really it's about threats as opposed to attacks. Okay, so it's very similar to Stride. So it's also what we might call structured brainstorming. It includes threats as well as actual attacks. So potential it's also a very general, like Stride, it's not that useful unless if you really understand, like you can't take something that you don't understand and just do an attack tree for it. So it requires some domain knowledge of what you're actually studying. So we'll do a very in-detailed example. By in detail, I mean it will take 2 or 3 lectures to do. And we'll look at TLS or HTTPS as an example. But anyway, so you do need, it requires domain knowledge. And then the amount of detail that you can do it in will depend on your knowledge, right? So if you don't know a lot, you could still do an attack tree. It just would be kind of surface level. If you know a topic really inside and out, you might do a really detailed attack tree. So the attack tree is really just a kind of, it's like an evaluation framework where it's a presentation of information. So it's a way of organizing what you want to say about the security of something. It's not a magic bullet that lets you tell whether something's secure or not without actually really understanding how it works. You can use Stride. With it. So when you brainstorm threats, you can use Stride. And yeah, so it's still like a high level evaluation. Okay. So the idea of it is you're going to organize possible attacks using a tree. That's where attack tree comes from. The tree will start with one node, and the node is an attacker's goal. So the goal of an attacker in attacking the system. Generally, it's a very specific goal. It's not like a general, let's just break the system. It's like, let's say that you want to attack a system. Well, you could take HTTPS. So it provides message integrity, meaning that you know that a message sent when you receive it didn't get changed. And it also provides secrecy. So if you want to break it, you would do an attack tree just for the secrecy property. And then you would do another totally different attack tree for the message integrity property. Okay, so so the same system might have multiple attack trees, one for each property that it's supposed to have. Okay, so the root node is an attacker's goal. And then the opposite of a root, this will be clear maybe when we see an example, but is a leaf node, and this is an actual threat. And then the path from root to leaf, it basically kind of tells a story of the attack. And it often follows a kind of paradigm where it's like, okay, the adversary has this goal, but the system has some defense against that goal, right? So then you say, okay, here's the attack, here's what's preventing it. And then you think, well, how does the attacker get around that defense? Well, they do something. So that's another node. And then you think, well, what's the defense to that attack? And then there might be another level of defense. And then you sort of alternate between attack, defense. And then eventually you get to an actual attack that works, that evades all the defenses. So it doesn't have to look like that, but that's often what ends up happening. Okay, so let's do an example, like something simple that we all can think about. All right, so I took the train here, but often when I teach at night, I usually drive. And at Concordia, there's a lot in the library building where you can park, paid, right? So you go in and you park, and actually you don't pay until you leave, okay? So that's how it works. Now, what if I want to leave the parking lot, but I don't want to pay? Using any malicious means that I can think of, okay? So that could be an adversary's goal. So the parking lot is set up so that you must pay to leave, right? But does that mean it's like 100% bulletproof, like there's no way to get out without paying? No, there's probably ways that you could get out without paying, okay? So that's something that we could organize in a threat tree, okay? And the reason we do it is, A, you could be an actual attacker, so adversaries will do this. But then also, if you're on the defense side, you want to think like an attacker, right? So you have to think about, and then you can think of countermeasures to the attacks, or you can decide, oh, that's just too expensive, who cares? You know, whatever your decision is, okay? So an attack tree is meant to showcase what attacks are possible, and it's also meant to highlight a broad set of attacks, okay? So, you know, we'll see that like as we fill the tree out, okay? So, but let's sketch in the goal. So we can say the goal is to leave parking lot without paying. Okay, so when you start with an attack tree, you start by just asking yourself, well, why can't I just leave without paying? Like, what is it that stops me, right? Like there, you know, is it my good nature? Like what is it that actually just prevents me from? Why can't I just achieve the goal right away, right? So what stops me from why can't I just drive out of the parking lot? Okay, so let's say that there's like this robotic arm that comes down and it stops you, right? Okay, so this is what I mean by attack defense. So the attack is we want to leave without paying. The defense is that there's this robotic arm. Okay. Then you say, okay, well, the robotic arm, that's the new attack. So the attack now is not just leaving the parking lot without paying, it's like, let's attack the robotic arm. Okay, so how can we attack it? Like what stops it from opening it? Like, for example, could I just drive through it? Sure, right? So that's an attack, that's a threat. So when they design these systems, they have to think about, well, what happens if a driver just drives through it? And so the defense to that might be, well, first off, you know, criminal charges and all of that type of thing. But, you know, it would be like, it wouldn't be so easy that you could just lift it up. Like, get out of your car, lift it up, and then drive through. Like, there would be some measure. But if you actually drove through it, probably wouldn't resist it, right? So the idea is that they strike a balance, right? They're like, well, what's the probability that someone's actually going to break this thing just to get out of paying $12? Right? And then let's weigh that against how much it costs to build a bigger or better gate or robotic arm. Okay? Could be that someone's sitting there. They couldn't really stop you anyways if you decided to do it. But there's like the fact that you would get caught like legally and things like that. They would have security cameras and that type of thing. But then you could go further and say, well, what if you cover up your license plate and wear a mask or whatever the case may be? Okay, so that's one thing that stops it. What's another thing? First off, how does the robotic arm open, right? So you don't have to break the robotic arm if you can get it to open, right? So yeah, I can go and I can try and lift it up. Let's say that doesn't work, okay? But are there other scenarios where it actually opens? Okay, so if you pay the money, right, it opens. So that's going to violate our actual goal. But let's take something softer, right? Does it know whether you actually paid the money? Or how? Let's say how. How does it know that you paid the money? Does the arm itself take, you put dollar bills in it?
No, with some code, barcode, or something.
Okay, so you have some ticket, it has some code, the code says that you paid, right? Is there any vulnerability there? Like what if you were able to print a ticket with a fake code, right? And the arm thinks it's real, so it lifts, but you didn't actually pay. Okay, so that's a threat, right? I'm not saying it's possible, but it's definitely a threat. So yeah, let's say we'll fake paying. Okay, so we can falsify the ticket, possibly. Like we could write the wrong QR code, but somehow it opens. Maybe the computer system, there's a breach, like we put some malware in the QR code, and when it scans it, it reboots or something. So the computer system itself. We could fake the money. So we could actually pay, but the money's not there. It's a fake credit card, stolen credit card, fake dollar bills or something like that. Okay, let's go back to the arm. So we can drive through it, we can break it, that's fine. We can fake paying, right? Is there any other way to get through it without breaking it or without fake paying? When else does it open? So it opens when you pay. It opens, you can drive through it so it doesn't have to open. When else does it open?
You can pay
Okay, let's say someone else pays. Does it open for them? Okay, can you sneak through maybe, like if you tailgate them? Okay. What if the power goes out? What happens? Say it louder.
In case of emergency, it may open.
Okay, so you could, so it probably, we call that it fails open. So let's say there's some sort of power outage, emergency, that kind of thing. So fail open is a concept we'll see later. So that basically means when some exceptional thing happens, you fail in an open state or a closed state. You could try and bypass it, like get around it somehow, like go up where you come in, for example. Like most of them have a gate on the out ramp, but they don't have one on the in ramp. There's a risk that someone comes down the ramp at the same time you're going out, but you could try and bypass it. You could, like, I don't know, drive through the wall or something. Okay, short of a power outage, let's say there's power, so the arm itself works. There's no problem mechanically, the arm's working. But let's say there's an internet outage, so the payment system doesn't work. Okay, the ATM can't contact the bank, so it doesn't know whether you paid or not. What happens then? So it could fail open. They could just say, well, the Visa machine's broken, so everyone can leave for free. So this has happened when I parked before. And this is an attack. So if you could bring down the system, you know, like with a DOS kind of attack, then you could leave. Same with the power outage. You can cause a power outage if that's your goal. I'll just say DOS. So DOS, remember, we can apply stride. So maybe let's think about this from a stride perspective. So DOS is a stride kind of attack. Falsify a ticket, what would that fall under in stride? Does anyone remember stride well enough? Spoofing. Okay, so I'm making a fake ticket, so that's a spoofing kind of attack. Stride has a property called repudiation. Does anyone remember what that means? Okay, so you kind of deny having done something that you did do, or conversely, you could say that you did something that you didn't actually do. Is there a repudiation attack here? Okay, so fake currency could be that, but one that we don't have. Fake paying meaning? Okay, so tailgating, that's funny. I don't know what, it's not repudiation. I don't know what, it might be escalation of privilege, I guess, is what that would fall under, because you're borrowing the privileges of someone else. You're kind of riding along. That's interesting. I never thought of which stride category that's in. But what's a new attack that's not yet here, just using repudiation? So what could you repudiate?
Using the same fake ticket.
Okay, so it could be the same ticket, or what if it's just like, hey, I lost my ticket, right? That's simple. If you go to them and you say, I had my ticket, I lost it, right? I paid, I swear I paid, right? There is a human there. The human has a key, right? And the key will open the arm. So that's another way to get the arm open is with a key, right? So you could trick the human, basically. So let's just note that you can't just go and lift the arm yourself, but there is a key, and if you have the key, then you could lift the arm. Okay? So you could do some sort of social engineering, have some excuse or something like that. Or you could just have a fake ticket with a fake QR code and say, you know what, I paid and like it's not working. Look, when I scan it, it doesn't open. And do you think the person that's sitting there will like fight you on it? No, they'll just be like, oh, must be broken, hit it a couple times, doesn't work, and then just let you out or whatever. Now, some of these attacks too, you can do once. Just like the Amazon example, like you can say my package didn't show up. You do it once, it's probably fine, but you do it 10 times in a row, then they start asking questions, right? So you can get out the parking lot once this way, but if you're always losing your ticket, you know, it's the 10th time, then it might not work. What about the key itself? So you could pick the lock. What about a fake key? Could you make by fake key, I mean a key that would open it. So it turns out that it's actually very easy to fake keys. All you need is a picture of it. So security person leaves the key on their desk, and all you need to do is get a picture of it. If you can get a picture of it, you can 3D print a key that's identical, and you're out. So we'll say it's not fake, it's a real key. It's just an unauthorized replicate key. So you don't even have to steal the key. You could steal it as well, you know, but if you get a photo, that's good enough. Another thing, actually, this is a very specific example. I forgot I see it in my notes. Going back to like saying, oh, my QR code doesn't work or whatever the case may be. What happened to me accidentally is I had the ticket and I folded it, and it had this like barcode on it. And so as soon as I folded it, the barcode wouldn't read. So I tried to get out. I was willing to pay, but it just wouldn't read the ticket. So I told the person, no, it got folded, and so it's not working. And they said, okay, whatever, just go. Right? So that's another repudiation. So you could deliberately fold the ticket. But once again, if you do it 10 times in a row, probably you're not going to get out. So you could damage the ticket deliberately. Okay, so anyways, this is good enough. So this gives you an idea of what an attack tree is. Basically, it's kind of like a story. So you want to get out of the lot without paying, but you can't get out because there's a robotic arm. But you're going to find the key. The robotic arm has a key, and you're going to get the person that has the key to open it for you, doing some social engineering attack or whatever. So that's kind of like a story, okay? The other thing that's good about attack trees is it kind of clusters things. So for example, there's 3 attacks: fake currency, falsify ticket, breach the computer system, and they all have to do with fake paying, okay? So it also lets you kind of organize related attacks. So there might be a bunch of variations. So this attack, fake currency, has more in common with a fake ticket than it does with like driving around it or tailgating, okay? So you can have attacks that are closer related. They can be in the same subsection of the tree as well, okay? So at the end of the day, an attack tree isn't going to let you analyze the system if you don't understand it, okay? It's only as good as your creativity in coming up with attacks. But what it does do is it lets you organize it and present it in a nice way where there's related attacks and there's a nice story from node to leaf. And it might also make you think of alternatives. So once I put in robotic arm, fake paying, then I'm like, okay, well, what are all the ways I could fake pay or whatever? So it can sort of force you to think through, is there another option that should go here under this subnode? And so you might think of attacks that otherwise you wouldn't think of, okay? And then the final piece is that it's really broad, right? Taking a picture of someone's key versus driving through something versus putting malware on a machine. Those are all like completely different attacks, right? But they all kind of hang out together on the same tree in the same data structure, okay? So your attack tree can try and get you to think beyond just like technical level attacks and try to encompass all the different ways that you can attack a system. So it might involve humans, it might involve physical properties, it might involve electronic properties, whatever it is. And that's what real world security is like, right? Someone wants something from you and your job is to protect it. They're going to do anything to get it, right? They're not just going to attack you at the network level. And so you need really good, intrusion detection systems, right? They'll cause a power outage so all your intrusion detection goes away. Right? Or they'll dress up like their IT support. They'll walk in and say, where's the broken computer? And they'll walk right into your server room and do whatever they want. Okay? So that's how real world systems get attacked. And so you want to be as broad as you can when you think about security. So anyway, so attack trees are helpful for those. Okay, questions about this so far? Okay. So we're going to redo this, but we're going to use a much more detailed example. Yeah.
What of faking sickness or something?
Yeah, that could work as well. So that could go under kind of like, it's sort of related to power outage. Like there's some emergency, exceptional circumstances. Yeah, and then then they might just let you go. So yeah, that could work as well.
I don't understand the difference between the levels. What is the difference in levels, for example, fake paying and under it? Yes.
Yeah, so these are all attacks that sort of relate to this.
This is the 3?
So these 3 are all related to this. I did this like kind of hastily, like I wasn't very careful in doing it. So like computer system breach maybe isn't part of this, but the idea is that you organize related attacks under a common parent node. So if there's 3 ways of, sorry?
All of them are attacks.
So every leaf node is an attack. So a leaf node is like an end node of the tree, right? So a computer system breach is the attack, but then we organize it under fake paying, and then it opens the robotic arm, and then it gives you that goal. But these intermediate nodes aren't necessarily attacks. Like the robotic arm is a defense, for example, right? So once again, I wasn't very careful. I'll be more careful when we do the detailed example. But you might say, like, if you want to keep everything at an attack level, you might say, okay, we have to evade the robotic arm, right? So that's an attack, but it doesn't tell you how to do it yet. But that's your goal. So you can think of it as you go down the tree also as sort of sub-goals. So your goal is to leave the parking lot without paying. A sub-goal could be to somehow evade the robotic arm, yeah? And so that's also a goal of the adversary. And then a sub-goal could be, well, just drive through it. And then if you can do that, then you're done. And then you stop. You don't keep going down the tree. Yeah. So you're kind of refining the goal. So instead of this like big open goal of like leave any way that you can, you say, well, what about all the ways that are about evading the arm? What are all the ways about attacking the payment system? Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. And once again, there's no hard science to this. It's sort of like 10 people doing 10 attack trees, even on the exact same subject, are going to come up with different answers. And there's no right or wrong answer. It's about communicating what you want to communicate. Okay. All right, so next we'll do a detailed example. So I'll show you like what it might look like. Same with the passwords where that wasn't even that detailed, but we saw the academic paper, it was a very detailed example. Here we're going to do it closer to an academic paper where it's going to be quite detailed. Okay, so we're going to consider some protocol called HTTPS. We refer to it in previous classes, so I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. It's the protocol that when you're on the web and you go to a website and it's, well, you type in HTTPS:// or you're redirected to a page that has it. There's a little lock icon that appears, and it basically says you have a secure network connection to that website. Okay, that's the goal of the protocol. Now, this sounds like it's just a network crypto thing, right? This is a bunch of cryptography that happens, and that's it. If you want to break it, you're going to have to break some cryptography. Good luck, okay? But as we study it, I purposely picked this example because it does start as a kind of crypto problem, but you'll see that when we really start to study it, that it turns into a much broader problem. So it's not just about crypto at the end of the day. In fact, most of the attacks have to do with compromising organizations, or you can compromise the right people and you can break this protocol. You could be a government and do something malicious and break this protocol. So it actually, anyways, we'll see it as we go through it. But you're probably thinking, if you know anything about HTTPS, that's just some network level thing. But we're really going to look at it in the totality of how the whole protocol works, and it quickly gets away from the network crypto details. In fact, the crypto details are the most solid part, right? It's all the other stuff that has to happen around the edges that make it a vulnerable protocol, and one that's very hard to secure. Okay, so let's go through the details of it first before we start building our attack tree. So first off, what is it? So it's HTTP over SSL/TLS. So let's dissect these. Okay, so what's HTTP? So HTTP is a network protocol. It's used for the internet, and it's basically for like downloading web pages. If that's all you understand about it, that's good enough. You don't have to understand anything more. So you can request a website, and then it comes back to you. It's called a resource. So your website might be like an HTML page. So you just say, hey, I want www.concordia.ca/index.html. And then you ask over HTTP, and the response from Concordia.ca comes back, and it says, okay, here's index.html. Okay, and then if packets get lost or things like that, then you know about it and you'll re-ask. And some of this happens at the layer below, which is TCP. So HTTP runs on top of TCP, and all those details really do not matter. Okay, it's really just you ask for something and you get it back. Now it might not come down with just the HTML. It might come down with the HTML, but the HTML tells you, oh, you need an image. You need the Concordia logo. So then you go back out and you say, okay, I want this logo. It's at images.concordia.ca/logo.jpg, and then you get that resource, and then you put it in the right spot. Your browser does that. And so anyways, you might be asking for a bunch of things, okay? But it all happens over HTTP. The alternative, what else could it happen over? Like what could you use instead of HTTP? So if you wanted like if you wanted it so like if packets drop, then you don't care about it, okay? So like when you're streaming things off of Netflix and things like that, and you know by the time you realize the packets dropped, you've already moved past that part in the movie, so you don't care. Then you might not use HTTP. You might use a datagram equivalent of it. There have been some people that have they're not exactly, like HTTP is at a certain layer in the stack, so these protocols tend to do more than just HTTP. But there's protocols like SPDZ, SPDZ. So this was something I think Twitter or Google came out with. Google and Twitter both had their alternative protocols. And one of them I've heard about recently, and the other ones I can't even remember the names of them. About 5 years ago, it was really trendy to try and do something, especially Google. Google likes to do it because Google controls a browser that's very popular, Chrome, and they have a website, a search engine that's also very popular. So at least when you're on Google servers and you're using Chrome, they control both ends. So if they want to do some custom protocol just for Gmail and Chrome users, they can do it, right? Because they know the browser talks to the website and the website talks to the browser, and they control both the browser and the website. So they're in a good position, and then they can test it because there's billions of Gmail users or whatever. So anyways, they're in a good position to test these protocols, and so they experiment a bit with it. But most of the web today, including Google stuff, still uses HTTP. Okay, SSL TLS is the crypto. So HTTP is just clear text. Anyone that's in the middle can listen. They can read your traffic. They can read your HTTP traffic. So what we want to do is we want to layer it in some sort of encryption to protect it. The exact crypto primitives that we use and how we combine them, that's a cryptographic library called, originally called SSL, now called TLS. So this is basically a bunch of cryptography. And yeah, so there's different versions. So there was SSL. When it first came out, 1.0 was skipped. It was just like never released. It was like a thing that was tested by IBM and other people in the 90s. And then when they improved the protocol and they released it publicly, it was called SSL 2.0. There's an SSL 3.0. And then instead of 4.0, they switched. So they called it TLS 1.0. And then there's a TLS 1.1, which wasn't used much. There's a 1.2, and then there's 1.3 is where we are today. And 1.2 is still pretty fine. So like we like this kind of region here. So this is basically secure. Almost no one uses 1.1. A lot of servers upgraded to 1.0 and then they stayed there. And then there were some problems with 1.0, but by then 1.2 was out, so they went immediately from 1.0 to 1.2, or today they would go to 1.3. So 1.1 it was just people who were really paying attention and being diligent and updating that used it. So this is very uncommon now to find 3.0 servers. It was very common when I started teaching this course 5-7 years ago. We'll go looking at websites and see what protocols they use. I'll show you how to do that. So when I started teaching it, we could find lots of websites that were using 1.0, including Concordia. But now people take security much more seriously, and so 1.3 is we'll look and see, but most people now are updated to 1.3. Okay, so how does it look if you are if you're on a website that uses it? So I go to google.com. Now, I'm either on HTTP or I'm on HTTPS, okay? I'm using Safari, so I'm not on speeds or some weird protocol, okay? So which is it for this exact website that you're looking at now? Am I on HTTP or HTTPS? And how do you know? Okay. So this little lock here, that's the universal indicator. And all browsers use it. It might look slightly different, but that basically says I'm on HTTPS. Is there another way that I could tell? Okay, so I could look at the URL itself, and what would I expect to see that's different about it? Okay, so you can see it's HTTPS:/. You probably can't see it because it's so small, but and similarly, if I want to make sure that I go to the HTTPS version, I can type in HTTPS. So we call this cues, visual cues. Later we'll look at usability. We'll maybe talk a bit more about cues. And then there's also this more technical indicator. So if you take someone that's a real novice to the internet, they don't really know much about it, they haven't been using it long, or they're using it for the first time, this is kind of meaningless, right? It just, they won't remember the difference between HTTP and HTTPS, right? It's some technical thing. But a lock is meant to be like a kind of user-friendly indicator that you're using a secure connection. Okay, how do you end up on HTTPS? Okay, so there's direct and indirect ways of ending up. So direct ways would be you type it in. So you type in HTTPS:// whatever, google.com. Okay, so that's fine. And what if Google doesn't have an HTTPS website? So some websites have them and some don't. Some have both, right? And you want the HTTPS version, right? So this is one way to do it. So you could actually type it in. Now, most people probably don't type in URLs. And if you do type in a URL, like say you go to Google, you probably don't type HTTPS:// you probably just type google.com, hit enter, and then somehow that's what I did, and somehow I ended up on the HTTPS version. Okay, so how did my browser decide when I just put in google.com and I didn't tell it whether I wanted HTTP or HTTPS? How did it decide to send me to HTTPS? Okay. So what usually happens is there's kind of like two answers. One is that because Google is big enough and popular enough that Safari just knows. So that's the answer for Google. But if it's some website that it's never heard of, it's my personal domain, what the browser will do is by default, it will try HTTP. Okay, so that's the first thing it does. It goes to HTTP. Then the server might say, oh, hey, I actually have a HTTPS version. I'm going to redirect you, right? And come back and ask for HTTPS. That message goes back to the browser, and then the browser asks for the HTTPS version, okay? So that's fine. But what if there's an adversary sitting in the middle, right? So they see you request the HTTP version. The server is saying, oh, don't use that. Use the HTTPS version. They can just drop that message, right? Or they can let you go to HTTPS then from the adversary to the server, and when they send the content of the website, you send it back to the user over HTTP. So the user never knows. They just stay on HTTP. So that's called a man-in-the-middle attack, which is a sexist term. We can call it a person in the middle, but generally people call it man in the middle. But anyway, so that's called a man-in-the-middle attack. Basically, someone that's relaying your information back and forth. So we're going to look at those kinds of attacks in detail. But anyway, that's a sort of indirect way. It's literally indirection. So you basically get redirected. Okay, but this is vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks. And then the next most common way is that like you don't go to websites because you're typing the URL in yourself, right? You usually go to websites because they're linked to from another website. Okay, so you're just following the links, and most of the links that you probably follow are from a search engine, right? So you search for something on Google. Google gives you a bunch of links to websites, and then you click on them. It might be a website to website, but often it's like Google to website. So you follow a link. And if you follow a link, are you going to end up on the HTTP version or the HTTPS version? Okay, so that's actually the right answer. So it depends on who's giving you the link. So they could give you the link to the HTTPS version, or they could give it to you to the HTTP, okay? So it's up to person providing link. So how does Google decide whether they should, there's a website, there's an HTTP version, and there's an HTTPS version, and they're displaying search results, and lots of users are going to search for that. They're going to find the link, and they're going to click on it. So how do they decide whether to send all users to the HTTP version or send all users to the HTTPS version? Okay, so this really comes down to just like human beings at Google, okay, engineers making decisions. And so classically what happened is HTTPS was thought to incur a penalty in terms of performance because you have to do a bunch of crypto, so it's more expensive. Now the crypto has become so fast, and there's other techniques that you can use that it's basically equivalent, or some people say it's even faster than HTTP, which is hard to believe, but it's because of other optimizations that happen. But now there's basically no performance penalty to using HTTPS. So classically, Google would always give you the HTTP version because it was faster. And then maybe around 5-10 years ago, one thing that really changed things is you probably heard about Edward Snowden, who was this person who worked for the US government, or a contractor of the US government. And he leaked some documents from the intelligence community, and they showed that the US government was attacking protocols like HTTPS. And so once people realized that, oh, governments are actually attacking this, it's not just theoretically they could if they want, then a lot of websites changed in response. And there have been other incidences as well. I'll talk about a few of them. There was another thing called Firesheep that I'll talk about sometime later. But those two events were like things that caused people to switch. But anyways, now Google's like, okay, you have HTTPS, we'll send you to HTTPS, right? Because it's security first. And there's another thing that's a sort of protocol that we're not going to dwell on. It's kind of like okay, so I mentioned that when I went to Google and Safari, it just knows about Google because Google's so common. In fact, if I search on something in Google, it won't even show me the URL. It will show me the search term in the search bar because it's so well integrated with Google because Google's famous. Okay, so that's fine. People at Apple know Google. They know they want HTTPS, and so that's fine. But what about for you, right? You don't know anyone at Apple, but you want every copy of Safari to know that you prefer HTTPS instead of HTTP. Is there a way to sort of register your website with, say, Safari or with Google Chrome and say, actually, I want my website to always load on HTTPS? And so it turns out that they have that program. So Google has it called, I forget. Anyway, there's a protocol called pinning. And I think they call them preloads. So it's like strict SDS preloads or something like that. I forget the exact name that they give it. But basically, you can sign up and say, hey, this is my URL. And you have to somehow prove to Google that you own the URL. And we'll talk about how that works at a technical level later. But anyways, you say, I just always want to, I want to always be loaded over HTTPS. Okay? And so that's fine. That's great. But if for some reason your server can't support it, you don't have the right certificate, there's a bunch of details that we'll get into. If somehow you can't do HTTPS, then nobody can visit your website because the browser, you can't fall back on HTTP because the browser is always going to force HTTPS. The other way you can do it is you can set what's called a PIN. So the very first time a user visits your website, you set a PIN that says, okay, when you come to me in the future, just remember, I want you to remember the fact that I have an HTTPS version. I prefer you to use that. Okay, and so that's another way that you can lock in HTTPS, but it requires that first trusted interaction. Okay, so if the adversary is sitting on, like say you go to HTTP and the website sends you back a redirect to HTTPS and a PIN so that you remember it, if the adversary's on the wire for that first connection, they'll just drop all that information. So you'll never learn that the website has HTTPS, and you'll never learn that there's a PIN. So another way that you do security when you can't solve problems is sometimes we call it trust on first use. And so what we do is we hope that the adversary isn't there the first time you connect. And then if you can just connect once without an adversary, then we can protect you in all future connections. Okay? But if the adversary is there at the start, then you can't do anything about it. Okay, so there's preloads, or there's pinning. And pinning is trust on first use. So this is another security concept that will come up in lots of different contexts. So it's sometimes called tofu. Okay, so this is how we get on HTTPS. Now, what exactly is HTTPS? So HTTPS, if you want an analogy, it gives you kind of like a secure tunnel to a website. So you have a user. More specifically, you have their browser, not like the human user itself. But I'll just depict it this way. You have some connection where you can send and receive information from a server. And then what you want to do is you want to wrap it in kind of like a tunnel. And a tunnel is meant to give you certain security properties, okay? And the goal ultimately is that you could have an adversary sitting here and they're seeing all the traffic go back and forth, and it does not matter that they're sitting there because it's a tunnel and they can't see it. Okay, and ideally we want to protect against what we call an active adversary. So that means they're not just passively sitting there listening. They can actually change messages as they go back and forth. Okay, now why is this a hard problem? Well, first off, in order to establish the tunnel, you need to exchange some information, like cryptographic information, but you don't have the tunnel to protect you, right? If you had the tunnel to exchange that initial information, right, then you're not setting up a tunnel, right? So all tunnels, you can't just instantly have a tunnel. You have to do something that happens before the tunnel's established. So it's called the handshake. So you do this handshake protocol, and it's before you have a tunnel. And at the end of the handshake, you have the tunnel. But the adversary is allowed to be there during the handshake protocol as well. And they can change messages or do different things. So we'll see some of that as well. Okay, so the tunnel's meant, it's an analogy to give you different security properties, okay? And you might think there's one security property it gives you, right? Which is that you can't see, the adversary can't see what's happening back and forth. But it actually provides 3 security properties. So that is one of them, but there's 2 other ones that it's designed to provide. And they turn out to be important. At least one of them is really important. Okay, so the first property is the one that you expect, which we call message confidentiality. So no party on the path, meaning the network connection between you and the server, learns what the data is. Party on the path, who could that be? So we talk about this adversary in the middle, like who is that in real life? Like, are we talking about the government, or, you know, like who are adversaries in real life? So the adversary, when we say also, they don't have to be in the middle, like literally halfway between you and Google, right? A lot of times the adversary is a lot closer to the user than they are to Google. So the adversary might be the Wi-Fi router, right? So I connect to the Wi-Fi router. The Wi-Fi router could be corrupt. I get my internet from an internet service provider, like Rogers, or Videotron in my case. So they have servers, and their servers are keeping logs of things. And so they're an adversary that's in the middle, okay? It might be some malicious device, like someone puts up a fake Wi-Fi router. They set the SSID to Concordia University or whatever, and if my computer tries to connect to it, it just accepts all connections. And so I end up on a bad Wi-Fi router instead, right? Or I go to some hotel, and they have really bad security, and someone has breached the network there, okay? So that's usually what we're talking about. Now it could be like some middle box that's, you know, under the, you know, at the shores of the Atlantic Ocean, and all the traffic that's going through, somehow somebody has breached it and they're listening in on that traffic. So that might be more like a nation level attack, or like a very sophisticated security attack. So it could be those kinds of things. But yeah, there are very reasonable adversaries that could be in the middle. Now, another adversary that's sort of too close to the user that we don't consider them is, what if the adversary is right on your computer, right? So let's say malware or a keystroke logger or something like that. HTTPS won't protect you in that case, okay? So HTTPS starts at the browser. So the tunnel starts with the browser. So if the adversary is outside of the browser, like before, somewhere between your brain and the browser, anywhere in that path, then that's not protected, okay? If you can get the data out of your browser, then even as it flows through the operating system to your network card out on the wire or wireless, right, then that's all protected, okay? But if your browser's corrupt, it's not going to do much for you. If your operating system has malware, it's not going to do anything for you. If there's some sort of bad hardware on your computer, it's not going to help you in that case. Okay, So that's what we want from a tunnel. Now, can anyone think of any other property that we might want from a tunnels? Okay, so what does that mean?
Integrity is like what is the message you are transferring? Entire message should be there at the destination.
Okay, yeah. So we have confidentiality. The second property is integrity. So it makes more sense thinking from the server to the user, but it actually applies in both directions. But the server is going to send you down a website. How do you know that that was the website that they sent down? How do you know someone didn't change it, right, as it was coming down? And so what we want is integrity. Now, you might think, well, if you have confidentiality, then don't you automatically get integrity, right? So if I'm an adversary and I can't even see the information because it's all noisy because it's encrypted, then I can't really change it, can I? So people shouted out no. Does anyone know why that's the case? It's the right answer.
You might not know what the information is, or you can just alter it.
Okay, that's exactly right. So even though information's encrypted and it's kind of noisy, there are still alterations that you can do that are meaningful where you kind of reach into the encryption. So like to give you some concrete examples that don't work exactly with the cryptography of TLS, but could work, is like with some encryption schemes, you could double a message. So like say it's your salary and it's coming across, and I don't know what the number is, but if I want to multiply it by a 2, that's fine. I basically just multiply the encrypted form by 2, and then when they decrypt it, it's like as if the plain text was multiplied by 2. Okay. There's other ones where like you can rearrange packets, or you could add like some packets on the end. You could like kind of add them on the end, and then it would still be accepted as valid. So yeah, so you don't get, just because you have confidentiality, the adversary can still manipulate data blindly, and they can still cause meaningful changes. And even though they don't know what the data is, they can structurally change it. Yeah, okay, so message integrity needs to be a second thing that you need. It needs to be an independent property. Now, we can't stop the adversary from changing the data, okay? They can change it. We can't physically stop them, but we can detect it, okay? So that's what it's going to do. There's going to be some error correcting codes, but they're like cryptographic. They're called MAC, message authentication codes. And if you change the data, the person's going to know it. And there's no way for, even if you flip one bit, it's going to completely wreck the MAC on it. And the person receiving it will say, oh, that's not right. Okay, so then they'll say, oh, there was an error with that message, so send it to me again. And then the adversary can always do a denial of service. So if they just want to keep messing around with your packets, then you're not going to be able to have a conversation with the server. Eventually you'll give up. But yeah. Okay, the last property.
Authentication.
Okay, what does that mean?
Whoever has sent the message, there should be some authentication that okay, this person, the server is sending message, then there should be some authentication that okay, the server has sent it.
Okay. So we'll call it server authentication. So TLS provides, so authentication is identifying basically who you're talking to. HTTPS has options for both client authentication and server authentication. Today on the modern web, no one uses client authentication, okay? We authenticate clients by having them log into the website, username, password. That's how we tell who anyone is. We don't use the HTTPS protocol itself, but there is an option for it. Sometimes in government and things like that, they use it. But we care about server authentication. Okay, and server authentication is, I'm talking to Google, right? So I type in HTTPS www.google.ca, I hit enter. A website comes down. No one knows the content of the website. No one changed the content of the website. And I got that website from Google, okay? So another way of thinking of server authentication with the tunnel analogy is we have this tunnel, it's great. Anything you put in the tunnel will stay secret and it will never be changed, or you can detect any modifications to it. But where does the tunnel end? Right? So let's say the tunnel ends at the Wi-Fi router. The user doesn't know that. They see one end of the tunnel. They're dropping messages in it, right? So if the tunnel doesn't go all the way to Google, but it stops early at the Wi-Fi router, then from the Wi-Fi, first off, the Wi-Fi router can see it, and everyone upstream from it can see it. There's no protection anymore, okay? So the Wi-Fi router can change it. They can change messages. What if the adversary sets up a fake Google, right? And you have a tunnel, and it's true. You have a tunnel. It's bulletproof. It's secret messages. You have integrity. All the crypto properties are true. It's just that the tunnel's ending at the fake Google, not the real Google. Then you might as well not even have the tunnel, right? So, it doesn't matter that you're using a tunnel if you don't control where the tunnel ends. If you can't tunnel to the right person or the right server, then all the protection that you're getting from the tunnel is kind of meaningless, okay? So we'll concentrate a lot on this, but the best way to break this protocol is not to break into the tunnel. It's to get the tunnel pointed at you instead of at where it should be pointed at. Sorry, say it? Yeah. Let me, I'll write it down and then I'll try and explain it again. And you'll see so many examples of it that you'll understand this inside and out. But okay, so the user goes out and they say, I want a secure tunnel to Google. And once they do some crypto, right? But who are they doing the crypto with, right? Like they send a message and a message comes back, but how do they know they're actually talking to the real Google or not? And so all they know is, hey, I set up this tunnel and I can see the tunnel's there. And I know that at least for as long as the tunnel is, every message I put in can't be modified and it can't be read by anyone in between it, right? But I don't know where the tunnel ends, right? If I don't know where the tunnel ends, then it could end with the adversary instead, right? So for example, we have this adversary in the middle. So what if we had a scenario like this? So the tunnel only goes as far as the adversary, right? And then maybe because the server expects a secure tunnel as well, the adversary could set up a second secure tunnel to the server. But basically, they just relay all the information in between, okay? So this, we're calling them an active adversary because they're relaying the information back and forth. And is this secure? Obviously not, right? And so what broke about it? Did confidentiality break? No. The tunnel's still, you still can't read stuff that's in a tunnel. Integrity didn't break. You still can't modify things that are in the tunnel. The only thing that broke is where the tunnel ended, essentially. Yeah? Okay. And then the big question is, okay, well then how do we figure out that we're talking to Google instead of the adversary? And so we'll answer that question later. Okay, but you can think in the back of your minds, like how are we going to solve this problem? And it turns out to be hard. Okay, so let's turn this into an attack tree. And yeah, go ahead.
How is the confidentiality not broken because where the adversary is sitting, there is no tunnel. The tunnel has ended. So encryption would also have ended.
Yeah, so it depends on how you define confidentiality. So what I'm saying is the confidentiality of the tunnel wasn't broken, right? So the tunnel still is confidential, but the confidentiality of that conversation was broken, right? Now, does the adversary care about whether they break into the tunnel or they somehow get the tunnel to end? They don't care. They just want to read the message, right? So if the adversary can do this, then that's fine, right? And so, yeah, so what we'll see is if you're going to attack this protocol, it's a lot easier to try and get this scenario than to try and break the crypto, right? The crypto, especially If they're using TLS 1.3, forget about it. You're not going to break into the tunnel. You could maybe do something if they're using an older version. Maybe you can trick them into using an older version. Like you can play around in the handshake phase to downgrade them to an older version. But if they successfully use 1.3, then forget about breaking into the tunnel. This is basically all you're gonna do. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
At first, the tunnel is established onto the server at first, and then adversary can break it, or no, somebody else define that until where.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So is this scenario one where you had a tunnel to the server and somehow the adversary came in and snipped the tunnel in half? That's not at all how it works. What happens is you think you're talking to the server, but you're actually talking to the adversary. And so from the user's perspective, when they make this tunnel, they think in their heads, oh, I have a tunnel that goes all the way to Google. But in reality, they have a tunnel that ends at the adversary itself. Yeah. So it's not like you're modifying an existing tunnel. It's like you're getting the tunnel when it's set up. At that setup stage, you're getting it to end with you as an adversary.
But how we can establish a tunnel onto server?
Yeah, how can you? So I want a tunnel to google.com. How do I know that my tunnel ends at google.com? Okay. So we'll get there. So it has something to do with certificates. But yeah. So put a pin in that. But that's the question that we want to answer, right? And yeah, okay. Okay, so let's define the root node of our attack tree. Okay, so remember the root node is an attack that we want to do, okay? And it also is just one way of attacking the protocol. It's one goal. So an adversary attacking this might have multiple goals, okay? So we're just going to choose one of them. So we're going to choose to break the confidentiality problem. So we want to read traffic that's going over HTTPS. We want to know what the content is, what are users browsing, what kind of websites are they visiting, that type of thing, okay? If we want to break integrity, that could be a different attack tree, but we'll just pick one to do the attack tree for. So I'm going to say I'm going to observe traffic sent over HTTPS and I'm going to say that the adversary is already in the middle, okay? So how they get in the middle, are they your ISP, are they your Wi-Fi router, like what? We're not going to worry about, we'll set that aside. That's a separate discussion, okay? So we're just going to assume that the adversary is already there, they're in the middle position, and so the whole point of HTTPS is it shouldn't matter. If you have a tunnel, it doesn't matter if there's an adversary in the middle, okay? So it should defend from an adversary in the middle. So we're going to put them in the middle. And remember, the root goal is the goal of an adversary. Okay, so our goal is to observe traffic, and I mean plain text traffic, like HTTP traffic that's being sent, despite the fact that it's being sent over HTTPS. We already have a man in the middle position, and we'll consider any way that you can think of attacking this. Okay. It doesn't have to be an attack on the crypto. It could be a network level attack. It could be, I mean, there's no humans really involved, but if there were, it could be attacks on humans, like whatever you can think of in order to try and achieve this goal. That's the goal of this particular attack tree. Questions about the goal? Okay, let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll start filling. So what we'll do over the next couple classes is we're going to do a deep dive into HTTPS and how it works. And our ultimate goal is I'm going to show you how to break it. And I chose an attack tree. It goes well with an attack tree because there's 100 ways of breaking the protocol, okay? Or 100 threats. And they're all very, very different. There's lots of different approaches. So it showcases all the right things that we want from attack tree. So when we the first thing we're going to do is let's just come up with the first layer of nodes. Okay. So we have this goal. We want to observe traffic sent over HTTPS from being in the middle. Okay. Why can't we just do it? Right? Like we want to leave the parking garage. There's this arm that stops us from doing it. What's the thing that's stopping us? What's the equivalent of the robotic arm? It's this tunnel, if you will. Okay. So we have this tunnel. The tunnel's the thing that's stopping us. Okay. So what we're going to do, what can we do about the tunnel? Okay. So that's going to define our first three nodes. And I'll argue that almost all the attacks I've seen, they fall into three categories, three things that you can do about the tunnel. Okay. The first thing that you could do is you could just try to break into the tunnel. Okay. So there are some attacks that do it. We're not going to dwell on them because they tend to be pretty technical. I'm going to put these in the order that I'll present them. So we'll talk about that one second. But you can break into the tunnel. And yeah, so that usually involves breaking the crypto. Because I'm not going to assume that you've taken a crypto course, I can't say much, but I'll give you some intuition as to what the attacks are and kind of how they work. There's some at some intuitive level you can understand the attacks, even if you don't understand crypto. So you can break into the tunnel. You can get the tunnel pointed at you instead, right? So we could be in this scenario here. So we'll talk about that third. We'll spend the most time on that one. Okay, and then the very first thing we'll talk about is you could actually just do nothing. Okay, and so even though there's a tunnel, right, maybe you could learn information about what's going through the tunnel even if you can't see it. Maybe you just inspect what's happening. Like imagine like a physical tunnel, right? You could maybe like listen to the tunnel and you could hear, I don't know, liquid going through or something. Like you can tell like kind of what's going through the tunnel even though there's a tunnel there. You can't see inside, but there are ways, or it's like vibrating or something like that. Okay, so is there that equivalent? You know, can we look at the vibrations of the tunnel or something? So we know it's encrypted data, so there is data going back and forth. It's not like a tunnel where you can't see it. You can see exactly what's being sent back and forth. It's just in encrypted form. So another way of saying it is we can look at the ciphertext, which is the encrypted traffic, and can we really learn nothing about the plain text by looking at it? Maybe we could, okay? So we'll just inspect the traffic from outside the tunnel. Okay, so we'll start with one. All right, so let's say I go to a website. I like football. There's a local team that's doing well. I'm actually from Toronto, so I like Toronto's team better. But we'll look at this website. So let's say I want to go to the Wikipedia article for the MLS team in Montreal, which is called CF Montreal. Okay. So is this website over HTTPS? And how do we know it? Okay, so there's a lock. Okay, so I'm the user. I want to go get that website, wiki/cf_Montreal from wikipedia.org. How do I do it? What's the first step? So I type into my browser, whatever. Let's say I know the URL, so I just type it in directly. I hit enter, or I click that link on Google, and I get redirected to that URL. It's over HTTPS, so we'll assume that the HTTPS is already there. Okay. Where does my packets go? I have these packets. I got to send them somewhere on the internet. Where do they go? Okay, they're going to go to the Wikipedia server. Where is it?
First it will go to DNS Step,
Okay, so I go to DNS. What am I asking DNS? Okay, so I'm giving it a URL and I'm asking for an IP address, like a telephone number. Once I have it, then I'll actually go to the IP address of the server, and then I'll say, hey, whatever server's at this IP address, give me this website. Okay, so we're going to try to account for everything because it's all relevant. So we'll include the DNS step. So the first step is that I actually go to DNS, and we won't get into the details of DNS, but it could actually be multiple servers like that you have to talk to, or the server that you're talking to has to resolve the URL with some other servers. And so it's not just one computer that's sitting there answering your queries, but we won't go beyond that level of detail other than to note that it's complicated and there could be attacks there. But basically we're going to say, okay, I want, oh, that's nice. I want whatever, English version of Wikipedia.org. And it will send back to me an IP address. I don't know what it is, but something like that. Okay, is this encrypted? Okay, you have a 50-50 chance. It's either yes or no. Who thinks yes? Who wants a guess on yes? Who wants to bet $10 on no? Okay, everyone's too scared. Okay, so the answer is no, it's not encrypted. Okay, generally. There is some attempts now to try and add encryption to it, but Chrome has some encrypted DNS options now. But we'll say traditionally not encrypted. Okay, so now I have the IP address, so I can find a server, and the internet works like you can just say, you just write it like an address, and then the postal system figures out, oh, I have to send it to this city, and then this address within the city. Like that's how the internet works. Okay, so if you have an IP address, you can find the right server. So this would be 108.3.xx. How do we know that it's Wikipedia based on this IP address? Think about that. I'm not going to answer that question now, but it's going to be a relevant question later. Okay, so then I say, hey, get me, so you usually send a message called get, which says I want this resource, and what it is just a URL. So I'm going to this server, n.wikipedia.org. The browser's not showing me the IP address. I could type it in. If I know the IP address, I could actually just type in the IP address and hit enter, and it will still work exactly the same. But the browser, it's giving you a nice user interface, so it's just going to show you the URL as opposed to the domain name as opposed to the IP address. And then I want /wiki/cfmontreal, and we'll ignore capital and accents and stuff like that. And then what I get back is a response. And the response would be, for example, the HTML page or PHP or whatever it is. So we'll just say that it's an HTML page. Okay. And because that lock is there, did this conversation happen over an encrypted channel or not? Okay, it did. So this conversation was encrypted. Okay, now when I get the HTML page, I'm looking at it. For example, this logo here, is that baked into the HTML page? Okay, generally not. There are ways of doing it, but yeah, like 99.99% chance no. So what is it then? how did I get this image? So I requested, how did I know to request it? Okay. So the HTML page that I did download, it told me, hey, I want you to put an image in this. Here's a box. It's this many pixels by this many pixels. I want you to drop an image in there. And you can go find that image from whatever, media.wikipedia.org or whatever, okay? Then I have to do the same process again. I have to go to DNS, right? Because, media.wikipedia.org is not the same as n.wikipedia.org, okay? Even though they're both wikipedia.org, they're different subdomains. You could have different IP addresses for those two subdomains. Could be a different server, one server that has all the images and one server that has all the websites or whatever, okay? So I'll go back to DNS, I'll say, okay, give me the IP address for this other server. Then I'll grab the image, I'll download it. Now I have the website and I have the image, and then the browser's job is to put the image in the right place according to whatever the HTML is telling it to do, okay? And so that's usually how these websites happen. So they're kind of weaving a bunch of content together. So I'll skip the DNS step, but it has to happen again if it's a different subdomain. So I might go to like upload.wikipedia. And I'll say, okay, I want logo.png. And then it sends me the logo. Okay, when I download this image, did that happen over HTTPS? Okay, so here's a website. There is a lock there. Okay, so the lock means that at least that first interaction happened over HTTPS. But if I'm loading images from here and, I don't know, JavaScript from here and a font from here, I'm putting it all together, do we show the lock if 100%, like if there's 1,000 elements on this page, 999 of them are loaded over HTTPS, but one of them is not? Do I say, oh, I'm not going to show the lock? Or conversely, do I say, well, the first page came over HTTPS, so at least the links to all the other resources, like the HTTPS website told me to go over HTTP and get it. So that's the problem of the HTTPS HTML file, the HTML file I got over HTTPS. So as long as I get that first page that tells me the links of everything else and where to go, then I'll say, oh, that's good enough. I'll just show the lock. Okay, so what do we think? Okay, so who knows, right? This is why designing browsers are hard. This is why, you have policies, and it sounds really easy, but then you face decisions like this. And so you're a security engineer working at Apple or Google or Firefox or whoever, Mozilla. You have to decide, right? What are you going to do? And your thinking might change over time as well, okay? So this is an example of what we call, let's say it does not come over HTTPS. Okay, so I'll just put this question mark in. So let's say it does come down over HTTP. We call it mixed content. Meaning some of the content came to us securely and some of it didn't come to us securely, okay? And so this is something that evolved over time. So originally, let's go back 15 years ago, we didn't worry about mixed content. As long as that root page came down over HTTPS, then that was fine. Okay, all the other resources could load over HTTP, and we wouldn't care. Then someone said, well, you know, if I download a Java file, like say I have my HTML page and it says go load this JavaScript file, okay? That JavaScript file is powerful enough to completely change that website, right? Like it can change it, it can go in and rewrite all the elements of the website. It can go and tell me to load resources that weren't included in that original thing, right? And so it seems really dangerous to let someone download something like JavaScript over HTTP because anyone in the middle could just change it. Okay, and if they change it, then it completely changes the website. It doesn't even matter what that root page was. It doesn't matter that it was loaded over HTTPS. So then people said, okay, here's what we'll do. Well, let's differentiate. So if it's a picture, we don't care about it. Yes, there's an adversary in the middle. The adversary could change the picture for some other. So I could go to the CF Montreal, you know, Wikipedia page and I might get a Toronto FC logo, but who cares? Like, it's kind of bad, but it's not that bad, okay? But if people are downloading JavaScript, then that's really bad, okay? So then what we'll do is we'll show the user a warning. We'll say, warning, there's mixed content, you know, do you want to proceed or not, right? And then what do users do? So you're on YouTube, you're trying to watch your video, and you get this warning that's like, warning, 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 mixed content, do you want to watch your YouTube video or not? Users are just like, yeah, I want to watch the video, right? And so they just click through it and then you watch the video, okay? So people didn't understand the message. Then the next like sort of evolution of the story is people started, okay, can we get the user to understand what this errors mean, right? Can we say like, hey, this website might not be the website that you intend, or like anyone in the middle could modify this website. Like could we phrase it in a way that at least is more understandable so that people don't just click through? Maybe we make it a little harder for them to click through. So like they can't do it from the first screen, but if they click more information, then they can read something longer. And then at the end of that, they could click through or something like that. So we can add some friction to it. So there was a stage like that. And then there's a stage where it's just like, you know what, let's just ban it. Okay, so if someone tries to load JavaScript over HTTP from an HTTPS website, we're just going to, the website will crash, or Chrome won't display it at all. It'll just say, I can't remember if they just had the lock. There was also like a lock that had like a weird, like kind of cross through it. Like they would show you the lock, but it was like circled and crossed out or X'd out. So that was like a mixed content signal, but users didn't really know what that meant. And so anyway, there was kind of an evolution on thinking. But now I think all browsers basically just don't let you load JavaScript, period, over HTTP if the base page is HTTPS. Okay, so what we do is we differentiate between what we call active content. So this is mainly JavaScript, and it could include style sheets because they sort of evolved the standard, so it's now powerful enough to do some scripting inside of it. So they're considered active. And so we kind of went through this evolution of it was allowed, and then we went to a warning. We had a different, like a kind of warning icon, like a lock with an X through it, that kind of thing. And then to where it's basically just disallowed. So this is where we are today. This is where we were, I don't know, 15, let's call it 15. I don't know the exact timeline. And there were maybe some middle stages and different browsers. Chrome tends to be the most proactive on security, so they often do things first. They're a little braver, they don't care. The problem with this is if you just disallow it, then a bunch of websites break, right? And so what if you break Facebook, right? Then no one's going to use your browser, right? So Chrome will say, hey, 4 months from now, we're flipping this switch, right? And Facebook is scared enough because they know how many Chrome users there are that they'll go out and they'll make the change or whatever. So it's a bit of a game, like at a business level, to get these changes through. But yeah. And then passive content is like images, HTML, that kind of thing. And I believe it's still allowed. I should test it because they keep changing things. I'll put a question mark, but I'm pretty sure it's still allowed. So if those images are coming down, it's not over HTTPS, then I think the browser will still display the lock, and you won't even know that it's a mixed content kind of scenario. Okay, so let's look more in detail at this page. So we'll use this as an exact example. So let's say I want to see all the resources that were downloaded to construct this page. So there's a bunch. There's a bunch of pictures, different uniforms, different flags for like the different countries. I assume that there's probably some JavaScript and things like that. There's like a login page and a few things like that. So there's probably cookies and other stuff. There's advertisements. So this is probably scripted. So actually, is that? I don't know if that's an ad, but anyways, it's a pretty like modern website. It's not as crazy as other websites. Wikipedia is pretty clean because usually it all comes down from their own servers. But let's say I want to see all those resources. How do I see it? So most browsers have, you might have to enable developer mode or something like that, but they have an inspector that's pretty good and shows you lots of information about websites. So it sort of looks like this. So I'm just going to refresh the page. And so you can see it's doing a bunch of stuff, loading different resources. So network requests, you can see that constructing this page, it's not just one request and then the page comes down. It's going back and forth a lot. There's stuff related to CSS. There's some scripting that's happening, CPU usage, whatever. There's a bit of a breakdown. And then if I want to see the actual, like every file that was downloaded to construct this website, it's here. So you can see it's a pretty long list. You have the website itself. Yeah, once I click on things, I always get lost here. Let me just reload this. Also, notice it takes a while to actually download. Like you see it right away, but it does take some time. I'm just going to empty my caches because a bunch of this stuff it's just coming out of cache. So let's do this again. Slow today. Okay, boom. All right, so I'm not going to fit all of this in a screenshot, but you can see there's lots of different kinds of things. You can see the type. I wish I could sort it by the time I received it. I guess that's this way. Okay, so you can see that it comes out of different URLs. So a lot of it comes from upload.wikipedia.org. You can see there's different kinds of files. So there's some images, PNGs are images. ICO is also like a favicon thing. SVG is an image. There's some scripts that come down. So there's a JavaScript called load.php. There's the actual document itself. This isn't sorted correctly, but anyways. So basically it's going to weave together a bunch of different content from different places. So let me just grab a copy of some of this for the notes, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, now let's think about HTTPS. So remember, our high-level attack node is we're just going to look at what's going across the tunnel. Okay, so HTTPS is going to hide all of this information, right? Maybe. Let's just go through and make sure. Okay, so let's say I download. So here's the index file. That's probably the first thing that comes out. Or actually, this is the first thing, and then it loads. But let's take, like, for example, the flag of England. Okay, so we have this flag of England. It has a name, okay, and we ask for it by name. So we say, hey, upload.wikipedia.org. I want / whatever / / it doesn't show the full URL, flag of England. Okay? And does this flag come to me, this image of a flag, is this coming to me over HTML or not? Or sorry, over HTTPS or not? Based on what you see here. Okay. So there's a lock here, so that means it is secure. Okay. So it's over HTTPS. Can I see the flag if I'm an adversary sitting in the middle? Do I know it's a flag of England versus a flag of some other country? Okay, so I cannot see it. Okay, so the content is protected. What about the file name itself? Maybe I can't look at the flag, but do I know that the client is asking for a file that has the name 23 pixels - flag of England.svg.png? Okay, so there's yes, no. Okay, so the people saying yes, something about DNS. Okay, so we.
If it is in the URL of
So it will go for DNS server to get the IP and that is not encrypted.
Okay, okay, so what we have is we have a URL that's going to look something like this. Upload, I'll just make it up. I don't know what the subpaths are, but this file is, you're going to say, I want to get the file at wikipedia.org / I don't know, let's just say images / 23 px - flag. I won't write it all out, etc. .png. Okay. Let's start here. Does someone that's looking at the traffic, does this go over HTTPS, basically, is the question. So is this information protected? If I'm in the middle and I'm looking at it, do I see that they're at least talking to the server that's called upload.wikipedia.org? Okay, so yeses, nos, any reasons why?
the adversary will be able to see because the request will go to DNS and that is not encrypted.
Okay, so there's something here about DNS. So it's true that this is going to get converted into an IP address. So really what I'm asking for is 108.3.x.x / images / this. Okay. Now we're going to assume that you can go back and forth. So obviously you can ask DNS, you can give it a domain name and it will give you the IP address. You can do a reverse DNS if you want to go in the opposite direction. So that's fine. Okay, so then let's talk about the IP address. Does the adversary know the IP address of where this file is? If this is happening over a locked, encrypted tunnel. Okay, so people say yes, so that's not intuitive to me, right? This is supposed to be an encrypted tunnel. It's supposed to protect this information. So if you say yes, why? Why aren't you protecting this information? Or why don't you just make a tunnel that protects this information? Wouldn't that be a better protocol?
Most of the time even IP addresses are keep changing.
Okay, so they are changing and things like that, but set that issue aside. Okay, so the answer is yes. It's yes to it's not encrypted. And the answer is that you have to know where the packet's going, otherwise it's not going to get where it's going to. Okay, so my browser is saying, I want this image, it's on this server, and there's a million servers out there. How do I know which server? Well, I have to address it somehow, right? So think of TLS, if you want, as an envelope. So there's some stuff that's inside the envelope, so you can't see it, but you need an address on the outside of the envelope in order to send it. Okay, so this information is in clear text. Okay, so this is not protected because it's needed to route to the right location. So you might say, oh, that's great. I'm going to make a better HTTPS where I'm going to protect it. Well, it's never going to work because your packets, you don't know where to send them, right? So you have to at least tell where you're going to send it. Now, once you get to the right location, this server can decrypt all the information. So do we have to keep this information? Is that inside the envelope? Does that have to be on the outside of the envelope, or can it be on the inside of the envelope? It can be on the inside. Okay, so this has to be on the outside so we get the envelope to the right place, but the exact file that you're looking for, the name of it, and then the actual content when it comes back as a response. So the request for the file name and the response of the actual image, that stuff can be inside the envelope. Okay, so this is protected. All right, so this stuff is protected in both directions. When you request, you name the file that you want. It's protected, and when you get a response, you get the content, the actual image itself, and that's also protected. And usually it's named too, so that your browser knows this image I'm looking at is it's this image as opposed to another image that's on the website. But this is not protected. What about this stuff? Whether something's a .png versus a .css file, does that have to be on the outside of the envelope, or can we have it on the inside of the envelope? Okay, so we can protect it. It's not necessary for routing the information, so this is protected. Okay, the last thing is the size. So these things vary in size. Does encryption hide how long a file is? So let's say I have two files. One's a kilobyte, one's 25 kilobytes. I encrypt them both. Can you tell which one's which? No? Okay, so let's assume that the answer is no. Then how big is the ciphertext? Is it bigger than... It's, sorry?
It's the same size.
Same size as the plain text? So it doesn't hide it?
No, both the 1 KB and the 25 KB ciphertext has the same. It's the same ciphertext.
Okay, so it's the same ciphertext size for them. So would they both be 1 in that case, or would they both be 25?
That depends on how the
Okay. So first off, I'll tell you that it's impossible for it to be smaller. Unless if you use compression, but compression's a different algorithm. So if you have a plain text and it's 25 kilobytes, your ciphertext can't be any smaller than that. Otherwise, you're losing information by definition, right? Maybe you can compress it or something like that. But let's say we have the file, we've already compressed it. You can't, the ciphertext, if you're going to decrypt it and get the same answer back, it has to be at least as long. So the other thing, so all we could do is we could take a small file and we could pad it, as it's called. So we could pad it out so that it's a certain, so they all look the same length. Do we use padding in TLS? Does anyone know the answer? So the answer is no, we don't. And the reason why is it would be massively inefficient, right? So we would have to like choose the largest of these, and a lot of them are like small things, and we'd have to like pad them all out. Now, encryption has a bit of padding, like a block cipher will take in 256 bits, and if you have less than that, it will pad it to the nearest 256 bits. But 256 bits is really small. Okay, so it pads it up to chunks of 256 bits, not even bytes, right? But you know, if you have something that's 25 kilobytes and something that's 1 kilobyte, you can definitely tell the difference when you look at the ciphertext. Okay, So encryption is more or less length preserving. And then there's other things called stream ciphers where it's at the byte level, like it's byte for byte, the same length. Last question. I'm downloading here, whatever. This isn't even the whole list. I couldn't scroll down. But, you know, I'm downloading probably, let's say, 100 resources. If I'm looking from HTTPS, do I know that the user is downloading 100 resources? Or do, for example, does all the traffic from upload.wikipedia.org, does it all just get chunked together and it all just comes as one blob? So to me, it looks like two streams. Like they ask for a blob of information from n.wikipedia.org. They ask for a blob of information from upload.wikipedia. I know how big those blobs are, but that's all I know. Do I see that? Or do I see that, hey, they asked for 5 images or 30 images or 65 images? Actually, I don't even know that they're images, but let's call them resources. Do I know that they asked for 30 unique resources from the same server, upload.wikipedia.org?
It depends on browser.
Okay, so maybe there are ways of optimizing by clustering together, but by default, it does not provide that information. So every single one of these requests, it creates its own like kind of TLS tunnel just for that. I'm sort of abusing terminology. It has one tunnel, but they're all unique requests. So you'll see an encrypted request go across. You'll see a response. And if I'm requesting 50 things, I'll send it as 50 different requests. And usually it's because the browser's parsing the HTML. So as soon as it hits the line that says, go grab this image, it goes and grabs that image. And then it keeps reading the HTML and then says, oh, now I have to go grab another image. It doesn't, it doesn't process the whole thing. Okay. So if I'm looking at this, even though it's encrypted, I see, oh, this person's going and they're down. I don't know what they're doing, but they're on Wikipedia. They're on some Wikipedia article that has exactly 50 images or whatever. I can tell that information. Okay. Okay, so let's summarize what the adversary knows just by looking at the outside. So they know the user is on n.wikipedia.org. They don't know what website they're looking at. They don't know that they're reading the CF Montreal article as opposed to the article on Toronto FC. Okay, they don't. That information is protected, but they know that whatever article they're reading, that it has, say, exactly 87, other resources. Okay, it doesn't know if they're images or JavaScript. It doesn't know the file type or the format or anything like that, but it can see each explicit resource that's loaded. Okay? And they know the size of every resource. And they know the order roughly in which they're requested. Okay, how many other websites, let's say that there's 87 resources on that CF Montreal, okay? How many other articles on Wikipedia have that exact same number of resources? Because if there's an article and it has a different number of resources, I can exclude that. I know that you're not looking at that article, okay? And then you could say, well, how many of them have a resource that's 14 KB and that's the very first thing that's loaded? Then it's followed by something that's exactly 28 KB. Then it's followed by something that's exactly 64 KB. And maybe there's a little bit of jitter in terms of these things, but how many of them have this exact set of resources? They're exactly this number, and they're all exactly this size, right? That's the only article on Wikipedia that has that fingerprint in terms of the web traffic. Okay? So even though this is all over HTTPS, I can look at this and I know which article you're looking at if I wanted to. What I'd have to do is I'd have to build an index. So I'd have to go to every Wikipedia page, download it for myself, record, how big everything is, how many resources it is. There's also things that mess it up. Like if you've been to Wikipedia before, you might have some of the images cached, so you're not going out on the network and you're not, requesting it. Okay? But worst case scenario for me as a user is I don't have anything cached. So I have to ask on the network for all of these things. And that website is basically unique. There's no other website on the internet that has that exact kind of fingerprint in terms of what it looks like for all the requests and the size of them and the timing of them and all the responses and the timing and the sizes of them. Okay? So you can train machine learning algorithms, or you could do it more manually. You can go around the web and you can index these things. And even though you're looking at HTTPS traffic, you can basically tell what people are looking at. So this is called a fingerprinting attack. So this is called fingerprinting. It works and people do it. So you can buy software. If you're Concordia and you want to know what students are looking at on the web or whatever, you might have like network sniffers, and they'll do this basic fingerprinting for you. Okay? But it's not all powerful. So this might sound like this is crazy. Like, why even bother with a tunnel anyways? Right? So this only works if the adversary can go there first and fingerprint the website. Okay? Then they can match it. So it's a matching game. It's like, I see you're going to this website. It's encrypted. I'm going to try and match it to a website that I visited over plain text. But there's a lot of websites that the adversary can't go to. For example, your inbox for Gmail, right? Because that's unique to you, right? So the adversary, they might know that you're going to Gmail, but they don't know what the content of your emails are because they weren't able to index that in the first place. They weren't able to go there themselves and say, okay, this is what their emails look like. Now I'm going to try and match it when they go in the future, okay? So this attack is very powerful, and it basically defeats HTTPS in practice, at least with a high probability. It's not always 100% accurate, but it would be like 80 to 99% accurate or something like that, okay? But it only works on public websites. So Wikipedia, everyone can go. They all get the same website. It all looks the same, more or less. And so it's easy to fingerprint a website like that. But anything like your bank, your inbox for your email, your social media, whatever, if people can't log into your exact profile, anything that requires a login, you can't use fingerprinting against. Okay? And so most of the stuff we care about keeping private are things that are behind logins. Right? It's not the websites that we browse to. Okay, so that's an important caveat to this attack. The other thing I would note is, even if you don't do this sophisticated fingerprinting, you always can see the domain, right? Any cipher in the middle can see the domain. It's just sitting, maybe it's an IP address. At worst, it has to do a reverse DNS lookup. But basically, you get the domain for free. You don't have to do anything sophisticated, okay? And that can often be enough, right? If I'm worried about you visiting certain political parties or visiting certain kinds of websites or whatever, the domain it can be incriminating just by itself. I don't really care what website you're looking, like what subpage of that website you're looking at. Just the fact that you're going to that domain at all, right? That's enough for me to do whatever, take whatever action I want if I'm someone that's sniffing on traffic in a position of power. So you can always see the domain, and that's often enough to. Often all the adversary cares about. This also goes to why HTTPS doesn't prevent censorship resistance, or doesn't provide it. So if, say, a government wants to censor the internet, they can do it at the domain level, okay? And even if websites are using HTTPS, it doesn't matter. They just say, you can't go to NewYorkTimes.com, and they can just turn it off. And New York Times can throw on HTTPS, but it doesn't let them evade the censorship, okay? The government couldn't selectively say, oh, you can read this article, but you can't read that article. Okay, in that case, when you turn HTTPS on, it protects that information, but they could maybe do this fingerprinting to figure out which article it is, okay? But anyways, so domain names are often enough or to look at. So you always see the domain name. So HTTPS isn't that great, right? It doesn't protect the domain name. It does protect the content of websites, but not adequately so adequately that if it's a public website, the adversary can't figure out from the encrypted traffic what it is, right? So it's really only good at protecting like detailed information, on like websites that are behind login screens or things like that. Also note that they still can't see like the flag itself. They can't see that image, right? They only can match it to the image that they were given when they went to that exact website, right? But if you have your own images and you have them on the cloud or whatever, you can't use fingerprinting. It's not like you can use fingerprinting to lift your images as they go by. Okay, so anyways, I want to convince you on one hand that this is a very powerful attack, and not a lot of people realize that they just assume that there's a lock and so it's secure. But on the other hand, I want you to feel safe online and not like this attack is so powerful that people can lift all your private information off. Okay, so that's all I'll say about this first. Oh, actually, there's one other attack. Let me mention. Another thing is you might not be able to break the information, but what you could do is you could just store it today and think that maybe in 15 years we'll be able to break it. Okay. So so a lot of these, like we didn't specify the time frame for our attack node. Our attack node was just that the adversary can observe traffic sent over HTTPS. But what if they can't do it today, but they can do it in 20 years, right? In some use cases, that's good enough for the adversary, right? Like if it's an intelligence agency for a government or something like that, okay? And in fact, there's a lot of evidence that intelligence agencies do this, right? So the NSA are building, like you can see from just satellite imagery that they're building these giant warehouses with a lot of computing equipment, and it's thought to be for storage. And it's basically like they're just going to record everything they can see on the web, and we can't break it today, but a lot of that information might be useful in 20 years, right? Things that were said, conversations, between like state officials or like that type of stuff, just store it. And, maybe we'll have a quantum computer or, who knows, or maybe there's some flaw in the cryptography that no one realizes, but in 10 years, someone's going to realize it. And you never know, maybe we can break into it in the future as well. Okay, so that's another thing you can do is just store HTTPS traffic. But in the future, in 20 years, you can't rewind and say, oh, now that I know how to break crypto, right, the crypto that people were using in 2020, can I somehow go back and get their traffic because it's useful for me now? Now, is there anything you can do about this at a cryptographic level? The answer is sort of mixed. It's kind of yes and no. So you can't exactly stop this. But if you have a sense of what algorithms might get broken, then you could not use them, or you could use them in such a way that their future break wouldn't impact past messages. And so one thing that we know about is quantum computing. We know that in theory, if you could build a quantum computer and it was big enough, that you can break cryptographic algorithms that are used today. Okay, so signature algorithms like ECDSA or RSA, those are Diffie-Hellman key exchange. These are protocols that can be broken with a quantum computer. No one knows if we'll ever have a quantum computer, and if we do, no one knows the time frame. No one's thinking it's coming next year, but it's more like a 20, 50 year kind of horizon. But what we could do is, so the way TLS is designed today, so it's different. There was actually a shift in how it was designed. When you go from TLS 1.0 to 1.2 to 1.3, there was a subtle shift in the cryptography, so that if these algorithms, they rely on some algorithms that are thought to be quantum secure and some that are not. But if the ones that are not are broken in the future, it doesn't help you decrypt messages today. Okay, so the algorithm is designed so that if you break it, you could hop in the middle of a conversation, and then you could basically end the tunnel at you. Okay, that's what breaking the crypto does. It lets you hop in the middle, have the tunnel end at you. But if there was a tunnel and it was truly end-to-end and you just wrote it all down, breaking the crypto won't let you break into the tunnel. Okay, it's an active attack where if you could break it, then you can mess with the setup of the tunnel. But once the tunnel's established, you can't break it. So anyways, I'm not going to ask you a question about that on the exam or anything like that. It's just for your own interest. But we call those protocols forward secure, or have forward secrecy. So before TLS, you could choose, sometimes you'd use it where it doesn't have it, and sometimes you would use it. So key exchange has it, key transport doesn't. Anyways, you'll take a crypto course and maybe learn about this, or even the network protocol course will probably touch on it. But so your TLS 1.3 traffic today, quantum computing isn't going to break it. But it's also possible that there are quantum algorithms that we don't know about that will break the other aspects of TLS that it relies on. And then there's also possibilities that those primitives are broken with classical computers, right? As well as quantum computing. So you're never really sure. Yeah. Okay, questions about any of this? Okay, so we'll break for this week, and then next week we'll talk about the other two subcategories.